agenda item 1, apologies for absence. I think we've had apologies from Councillor Lamb, but we should have Councillor Firth representing. And I don't think we've had any other apologies. No, thank you. Agenda item 2 is declarations of interest. Anybody got anything to declare? No? Okay, thank you. And I don't think there's anything on the agenda today that requires the exclusion of press or public. Okay, thank you. Okay, so agenda item 4, minutes of the last meeting. So has anybody got any comments or queries on the minutes of the last meeting? And that was the meeting held on the 22nd of March. No? Okay, can we take those accepted then, please? Thank you. Okay, agenda item 5, governance arrangement. This report covers 3 broad areas. We've got arrangements for this committee, which were approved at the annual meeting on the 22nd of June, a summary of grant applications considered during a financial year, and also then ask on this to consider the proposed work programme for the year. So if there are any specific areas that this committee wishes to be included on the work programme, this is the opportunity to make those wishes known. So could I ask Caroline, please, to introduce the paper and take us through anything of importance? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think you've highlighted fairly succinctly for me there in terms of the scope and reach of this report. As you say, it does set out the governance arrangements, including the membership, quorum, and terms of reference for the committee, which are appended to this at appendices 1 and 2. In terms of information here for your perusal, we've got the grant application information, which we do share with you on an annual basis, and this is with there's 2 successful applications set out there in the table at 2.10. This is shared for transparency purposes, in line with our bespoke protocol, where applications are received from serving members on our committees. We don't want to exclude them from membership on our committees, because we want to try and get the best from both in that sense, but we do go through a separate process which does involve a sign-off by the director and myself as monitoring officer before the application is signed off by the chief executive. So there was 2 applications this year, and they are there for information, but with the confirmation that they appropriately went through that process. I think that the matter probably for the discussion of this committee, as you've referenced, is the draft work programme at Appendix 3. So I'm very happy to take any questions on that, or to collate any additional items that members might want to see on that work programme. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Has anybody got any queries on that or suggestions for additions to the work programme? No? Okay, can I just ask one thing then? It does mention, it mentions in the paper about the joint independent audit that we should see every year, this committee should see every year, and I couldn't find that in the work plan, in the forward plan. Is that in, or can it be included?
Yes, absolutely, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, the only other query I had, it's again in terms of reference, mentions the value for money opinion, which again we receive as part of the annual report from Mazars, but I'm just wondering if that ought to be itemised as well in the plan or not, just so we don't lose sight of it, because it is quite an important area to consider.
Yes, we'll add that in as well.
Yes, Councillor Hinchcliffe.
So, of course, there's an audit going on about the bus opportunities going forward, about whether how they're going to be regulated in the future. And I just wondered what role this committee has in looking at the risk and finances of that decision.
Okay, who would like to pick up that point? Yep, Brooke.
So the audit that's happening at the moment is an external audit, so there's a firm that has been brought in and there's a very strict legislative setup for how that audit is performed. I would think that the outcome from that audit should certainly come back to this committee in terms of it being that are responsible for managing that process to see exactly what they can bring back to this committee to share, because I'm sure they could do a report at the end of the audit phase.
Thank you. I think that would be useful with that answer. Yeah,
Yes.
that's lovely. Yeah, smashing. Thank you very much. Okay, so if there are no further queries, can we note that this item has been considered? Thank you. Effectiveness of the internal audit, and I think this is one that's for Angela to take us through, please.
It is, thank you. This is the paper that comes every year as part of the annual cycle. As the report sets out, there's a requirement for the relevant body to undertake a review of internal control and the effectiveness of internal audit. The Combined Authority uses the Governance and Audit Committee as that appropriate body to hear the findings of that review. So the report then sets out further information on the internal controls around the corporate governance code and framework, which we have discussed here and is subject of an item later on the agenda. It has been revised, but it is going to be a bit more of a fundamental review, and that work will be coming back here to this committee to be involved in the autumn. The annual governance statement sort of reviews the system of internal control. You would in normal years have seen that as part of the annual accounts at this point of the year. With the delays in production of the accounts, you haven't yet seen that, but there is a draft which is a positive conclusion in terms of the governance arrangements. So the officer side of that is in progress, and the internal audit report, which follows on the agenda, gives a positive review of the Combined Authority's control, governance and risk management framework. So you will see that in a moment with Bron. In order, however, to accept that the work of the internal auditor is worthy of being listened to and taken on board, we need to be comfortable that actually that work's being conducted in the appropriate manner. The way we've done this historically is that we've done a bit of a sort of desktop review of the information available, which is a bit of relying on the external review, which is done every 5 years, which is coming up shortly, and a bit of an internal review against the public sector internal auditing standards, and there is a level of compliance with that. I think the committee has reflected positively on the audit work that's come to it during the year, and I think it's been reassured by the rigour with which internal audit is approached. You've seen a number of the documents supporting the way internal audit works. I think overall the conclusion therefore is that we can accept as positive the internal control review and the effectiveness of internal audit, and always with that little caveat that this isn't about the internal audit team or indeed officers looking at the internal control environment resting on their laurels and saying job done, it's all okay. It is always a bit of a continual improvement, and always striving to do a bit more, improve a bit more. So a positive opinion at this stage does not mean work stops and we don't keep trying to improve it. And I'll stop there, thank you.
Thank you, and it was a very positive report, so yes, I was pleased with that, and yeah, well done to Bron, I think, in challenging circumstances. So any members got any questions or comments on the paper? No? Could I ask Angela just about the external review that's going to be undertaken next year? Can you just elaborate a little bit more on the process for that?
We will be planning that this year. It's something Bron and I talked about. So we brought in an external consultant who did the review 5 years ago, just before our current head of internal audit joined us. We are haven't yet determined that route. It will be somebody external. It could be through a peer review from a similar organisation. It could be by going out through procurement. At the moment, I think Bron is testing the waters about what options are available, and we'll be agreeing with the Chief Operating Officer what the best route is to get that review, but I'm sure she'll be able to provide an update by the time of the next meeting, because we are planning it now in readiness, but it isn't to take place until next year.
Okay, and how will the scope of that audit be agreed? Because there's going to be a need for a bit of impartiality, isn't there, in that?
So basically the scope is set because it's a full review against the public sector internal audit standards. So there's no bit of it that don't turn over in some fashion. But in terms of the independence of it, that's the bit we're looking at, because quite a number of our colleagues in other MCAs do peer reviews. But it's about making sure that, you know, who you select for your peer review is not someone you have a close network relationship with, which we do with quite a number of the northern MCAs. So we're putting feelers out to see who else is out there who might be interested in doing the peer review for us, on the basis that we would then reciprocate at some point. But yeah, so it is all in hand, but we're very mindful, in order to meet the public sector internal audit standards, that has to be a very independent review. So yeah, that is absolutely part of the thinking.
Okay, thank you. So we'll see that next meeting. So, yeah.
Yes, I'll include that in my updates for the next committee.
That's lovely, thank you. Okay, any more questions? No, so can I ask members if they support the outcome of the review? Yes, thank you. Okay, move on to agenda item 7, and that's for the committee to consider the internal audit annual report and opinion. Once again, Bron, you know, well done on the outcome of this. I think the work shows that there's been a real commitment to having a rounded system in place. That's what jumped out of it to me, so I think it's come a long way. So would you like to take me through the key points of that? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So on a very positive note, there's no change to the opinion this year. And I know everyone hates the word adequate, but adequate is basically, from an auditor's perspective, a good result, because an audit opinion is time limited. It's a point at which you sort of, you know, sum up all the work that you've done, and it can't ever be absolute assurance. So I think for us, given the huge change and the huge growth in the MCA, to have an adequate opinion again is a good and positive outcome. You've alluded, Chair, to the fact that it has been quite a challenging year. We've had enormous resource difficulties, but we've worked hard with our senior leadership team to make sure that we've reprioritised throughout the year to focus on the riskiest areas, and to make sure that we carried forward those reviews that it was sensible to carry forward, and made sure we finished those that we thought we needed to include in the opinion. I also wanted to point out to the committee that this year, compared to last year, we have more limited and minimal assurance reports. That's a good thing. You may not think it is, but actually it suggests that we are getting the risk focus right. So we are looking at the things that are not absolutely ticking away nicely. We're getting into the areas that are a bit more difficult. And it's nothing that, in my experience, my long experience, unfortunately, of working in audit for many years, I would expect to see an opinion covering this kind of range of audit outcomes. So I'm feeling more confident that we are growing the team in its experience and its focus, and we are working really well with the senior leaders in the organisation to focus on risk. So those are the positives. What we also have to balance this against, though, is how sustainable is this given the growth of the organisation and the breadth of responsibilities that it has. So we are doing a piece of work at the moment to look at the audit universe. For those that come from an audit background, you'll know that that is quite a significant piece of work to do, to really understand the full range of things you should be assuring, and to make sure then you have plans to be able to cover that. So that is work in progress as I speak. And again, we will report back to the committee on the outcomes of that. So looking forward, I think we'll still have that, what seems like an eternal issue around trying to find good auditors out there. But again, on a positive note, we have just recruited one individual, and we're about to offer to another. So if I look slightly happier than I normally do at these meetings, it's entirely for that reason. So for the rest of it, it's a case of, I'll assume you've read the papers, and any questions, I'm very happy to pick those up specifically.
Thanks, Bron. Has anybody got any questions? Councillor?
Thank you. I can echo the chair's thanks in terms of good effort given the recruitment difficulties and other difficulties we've had, and given, present company, given the difficulty nationally in terms of external audit in relation to local government work and how difficult it's been to get that done. And Michael mentioned that at the local government conference recently. I just wanted to ask a question about the management and timetabling of, I think it's about seven or eight items which have been carried over to the next year, as it were, deferred till next year or carried over. In terms of, is this really shorthand for sometimes maybe never, or do they actually have a place in the internal audit plan for the coming year?
Thank you, Councillor Scullion. That is a good question, because I would say that sometimes that is what happens at the end of a year. Things drop off because you've not had the capacity to do them. But we have made the distinction in the paper of those that have carried forward to be completed, and actually a number of those unfortunately didn't make the cut for the publication of the papers, but a couple of those are already done. The ones we are dropping are the ones that actually there was only one that we removed from the plan. And we did that deliberately because we couldn't, on a risk basis, justify doing that piece of effectively advisory work. So the others are definitely on the cards for this year, and the two that were deferred because the organisation wasn't ready for us to do that piece of work at the time we were planning to do it. And that was just a reflection of the progress against either the review of the Code of Corporate Governance, which we've had a few amendments to, which I think is included in this paper later. But there is going to be a fuller review of that, and actually it makes sense for us to do that work at that point. And similarly with climate change, what we did was some high-level meetings with the teams around climate change, but what we are finding is it's stretched across so many areas of delivery in the business that we are having to really think about how we effectively audit that, and whether we break it down into more individual bits of delivery chunks against the plans. So those are the only reasons those were deferred, and the others are either just done or just about to be done.
Yeah, Councillor Scullion?
Chairman, I come back. Item 29, climate change external plans. I just chaired my first climate change committee, and indeed you're right, perhaps the work has been a little wide-ranging, really, and I would hope to focus much more clearly on some key areas that are very much the business of the combined authority, and we know that other partners are working in other areas, so perhaps we could have a discussion outside this committee about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hinchcliffe?
And just sort of going back to my previous point, really, I just wonder, obviously all the streams of work you've been looking at, is there enough on there in transport, given it's such a big piece of our work? We seem to concentrate on some smaller issues, but are we making sure we're looking at the big pieces as well?
Not enough, and I would completely concur with that, and that's partly driving this review of the universe, because some of the big ticket transport programs coming up now, while ever there is quite a lot of external assurance around those, there's still about, are we putting the governance and the controls effectively in place internally? So I do think there's a lot more work to do around that, and that is partly why we really do want to look at whether we've got sufficient resource. I think there's a recognition across all of the MCAs, particularly in the northern region, around how much the transport agenda is growing and what that means for us. So we have started a transport audit network to look at what all of us are doing, so to see if we can help out and where there are specific skills, if we can do a bit of a trade-off and things. So I think it's high up everybody's agenda at the moment, and it's definitely, you are absolutely right, needs more focus.
I think it might be helpful, actually, because I'm not talking about putting more in it. Some of it might be able to be taken out as well, a bit at the wrong stage of the process. I think the whole thing could do with looking at from a streamlining point of view, and it may be with your governance and audit kind of hat on, you'll be better able to give them the confidence of when they should be looking at and what they should be looking at, rather than looking at stuff that might not be quite as useful.
Thank you. I've got a couple of queries. On the performance indicators, we've got grant claims at 58% against a target of 90. So I just wondered what's happening in that respect to try and bring that performance up. And then my second question was around the whistleblowing one, which fraud and whistleblowing reports within 10 working days, and that's quite low. My query on that one is if that is because of the complex nature of whistleblowing, is that the right target we've got?
Good observations, and they are by far and away our poorest performance indicators. The grant claims, it's an interesting one because we set ourselves quite a high target around that at a point at which we had quite a known pipeline of grants, but they have grown considerably, and we get quite a lot coming slightly out of left field. So we're doing some work internally to try and look at across not just the audit team, it obviously impacts the finance function, it impacts some of the kind of the governance things around getting things signed off by the chief exec, all of those kind of things. We need a better pipeline. So it's a bit of a reflection of we get more in than we can cope with at one, and they all come at the same time. And resource has been such an issue. It's been a case of do the most important ones first and just work your way through. So we have absolutely compromised on delivery of all of them in terms of the timescales we set. We will need to relook at that because the nature of the funding at the moment is not changing. We're not getting single settlements. We're not getting, there are lots of individual funding streams still coming through. So we're going to have to think about how we manage that. And then it's a similar picture with the fraud and the whistleblowing. We've just had many more issues raised with us, which we think again is a positive because people are reporting things to us. They feel confident that we will action them. But we have, I think, 0.4 of an FTE doing counter-fraud work at the moment. So that's something else that we're looking at as part of that resource for the team going forward.
Jen.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Bron. I think I had queries really in relation to should the grants work and the fraud work sit with internal audit, because it traditionally doesn't in most organisations. Is that the best use of your very limited and precious resources?
So I think it should, but I think it needs to be resourced properly. And I think actually we do quite a lot of, particularly around some of our funding streams, adult education budget is an example where we do a combination of audit and sometimes investigative work. So it does make sense for it to sit there, but I would argue that we don't have sufficient resource at the moment.
Okay, so this review that you're undertaking is particularly important, and I think that'll be this committee's opportunity to challenge it and to make sure some of these concerns are picked up and can be addressed through that work. So yeah, look forward to seeing that. Okay, any other queries on that paper? No, so if we can note that the committee's considered that report, please. Okay, agenda item 8, and that follows on from the last paper, and that's a report on the progress of internal audit, and that's back to Bron again, I think, please.
You'll be tired of my voice by now already. I know mine's going. So progress update, as you'd expect. There's not a huge amount in here yet. We are completing or have been completing last year's work, and we are doing quite a lot of planning work at the moment, as I've already alluded to. Having said that, we are making good progress, and what we have done in this report is made sure that the committee have had the summaries of work that completed between the last committee and this one. So even though they're in the opinion for last year and arguably not a progress update for this year, I still wanted the committee to have sight of the work that we'd actually done. And when you look through that, you do sort of get that balance of, yeah, there are more limited and minimal assurance pieces, but they are looking at the right things and they're looking at the things that are important to us. We do have quite a lot of work ongoing at the moment in the adult education budget funding stream, and that's where our 2 new recruits are moving into. So that's a hugely positive thing to report back. And we have closed off, as I said earlier, an additional one of the fraud investigations that was highlighted in this report. So that's looking a little bit more manageable at the moment as well. So it's not perhaps as much progress as we would have liked at this point, but I think as we bring more resources in, we're hoping to get that position onto a bit of a firmer foundation.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? No, could I raise a couple, please? Sorry. It says on the report there's no overdue actions, but I think it could just be useful if we could just put a point in time into the report when they were last reviewed, because if there's a delay in, if they were reviewed 3 or 4 weeks ago, the position now may be different and it may well have become overdue in that interim period. So I think that would be useful.
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
Thank you. And then the only other thing I picked up was there seems to be a bit of a golden thread through some of these papers around issues with contract management. So I was just wondering if that matter is being looked at holistically and how these cross-cutting issues are being picked up and managed.
I think that is correct, and one of the things that we've been working with our commercial team on is the development of the contract management standards for the organisation. So they've been doing a lot of work at building additional monitoring of contracts, and they've now got a very good system in place for looking at the very risky, very high value contracts, and we want to see that promulgated down into the rest of the contracts. So we're working with the commercial team to try and help them do that in a way that would enable us to take more assurance from the controls being in place. But it's a good point, and it is something that you stand and fall on your contract management, because at the end of the day, that's how you get your delivery. So we are planning to do a contract management review of our AB programme, and we're planning to do a contract management review right at the end of the year on the central and corporate approach to contract management, as well as we will continue to dip in and out and look at particularly contracts that are flagged to us as something of concern.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Hinchcliffe.
So the other things on the EDI stuff, presumably that's just an internal staff thing, is it? Because obviously EDI has wider implications about service delivery. So we've not looked at service delivery, just looking at internally.
So I'm sitting on the EDI Oversight Board, and what we've agreed is that Oversight Board will direct the work of internal audit. So where there are concerns that are coming out, irrespective of whether it's the internal plans or whether it's looking more widely than that. But I think it's an area that we would want that board to be looking at and considering based on the evidence that they're reviewing before we commit to doing specific work. So what we've got on the plan at the moment is about the internal compliance, it's about the internal structures, etc. But that doesn't mean we can't be directed to do some specific service delivery work more widely. And I think it's right that that board does take that view in terms of directing the work.
Councillor Firth.
Thank you for that. And I just wanted to ask on one particular point. You mentioned about reviewing contract management by the end of the year. One of the other mention points about, other than the contract for AEB, is that of facilities management. And I just wondered, is that what you're talking about being reviewed by the end of the year, or is it something that maybe needs to be reviewed earlier, given the fact that in the report it's mentioned that you potentially haven't been able to re-tender the contract because of concerns about the framework being in place to ensure that controls are in place to ensure we don't fall foul of it?
We could have left that on. So yeah, the facilities management one, because of the nature of the assurance level, we're doing that again this year. So no, that's a separate one that we are doing again and not at the end of the year.
Right.
And actually they have taken some action as a result of that review we did to get that contract through the re-tendering process. So we put our commercial team onto them too.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to agenda item 9, and that's the External Audit Progress Report. Angela, anything you wish to highlight?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Two parts to this report. One is the conclusion for the 21-22 accounts, which at the last meeting we were within days of finalising the outstanding queries we hoped, and that was not to be. And it's a national issue, primarily linked to the pension, triennial pension revaluation, which meant there were updated pension figures that we all then needed to take into account. So accountants up and down the country are now changing accounts to reflect the latest pension figures. It has no impact on the results for the year. It's simply the disclosures and the it's a balance sheet impact that is that goes in and out and is woven through the accounts, but is of such a magnitude of change that many of us have had to make those adjustments. So we have done that. We are now very close to finalising the last few outstanding queries with the auditors, and Mark Outerside is here and can confirm that in a moment, I hope. So we're hoping to move to getting the accounts signed off in the next few weeks for 21-22. There are many others nationally in a similar position, so it's nothing special we've done or not done. It's simply the combination of auditor shortage, delays, and then compounded by this pension and infrastructure advice that was updated as well during the audit time. 22-23 accounts, we explained last time that we did not intend to rush those to get them out by the end of May, which was the statutory deadline. We'd had no planning done for the audit work. We were still finalising 21-22, and so in common with many other organisations, we chose to focus on doing a good job on producing a set of accounts, and we're close to finalising the 22-23 accounts. Mazars have been busy, as all other auditors have, doing NHS audits. They're now back, they're now focusing, as we agree with them, to get 21-22 done, and then attention will turn to 22-23. And the intention was to bring forward a planning document to, I think I've said the September meeting, but it's actually early October, our next meeting. So we will bring the draft accounts to the next meeting of this committee, irrespective of the timing of audit or not. We'll bring them here for you to see at your next meeting for comment. We did have an interesting update with the auditors very recently. We are aware that nationally there are attempts to try to find a solution to this backlog. It is a national backlog. There are lots and lots of audits outstanding. There is a change in audit appointments next year for many organisations through the PSAA arrangements. We have retained Mazars going forward, which means it's not so much of an issue for us, but we are expecting there to be advised very soon of perhaps some measures to bring the backlog to an end, which can only mean not everything getting audited in the same way, to the same extent. And as soon as we know more, we'll let you know. I have a horrible feeling this will all come to a head between now and our next meeting, and if there's anything that committee members need to be aware of, once we've had formal notification, I will let you know. But it does seem that there's a little bit of enough is enough, and nationally it is unfair to everybody to continue like this. It's not fair, the pressure on auditors, and for those charged with governance, you're left without the assurances that you're expecting, and they're getting older and older and older, and we need to be able to focus on knowing things are right now and focus on going forward. Mark may wish to say a little bit more on any of those items. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Yeah, I think Angela's probably summed up where we are. In regard to the 21-22 accounts, I don't think it is a technical issue in regard to the pension figures, and we are trying really hard to get those resolved as soon as we possibly can. We've also got a few queries outstanding with the valuers, and we're waiting for responses from those. And as soon as we get those, we hope to be able to finalise 21-22 in the next few weeks. But there just seems to be these black swan events that come out of nowhere that seem to not enable us to do this. And then again with 22-23, that is the plan, to bring the audit plan to the next committee, all being well. So I've got nothing else to say really on that matter.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Councillor Scullion.
A comment rather than a question. I think it actually flags up the importance of the ongoing rolling programme of internal audit, really. We're not dependent on just the annual external audit and what was the movement in reserves in the last year, but actually trying to keep a kind of very current, ongoing grip across the range of things that the combined authority does. So it's lucky we're not just depending on the external audit, given the national situation.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. I think this committee especially needs to see the figures on a regular basis, doesn't it, to get that assurance. Yeah. Okay. Any other queries? Yes, Councillor Firth.
Thank you, Chair. Further to those points, obviously, the situation, obviously we understand that we would all like to be in a better position. Do we know whether it's going to have any implications on the next auditing of the next year's account in terms of actually making sure that the backlog doesn't continue? And do we have any particular meat on the bone that can provide around that and making sure it doesn't happen as much as possible?
I think that's what we're waiting to hear, what the national solution is. I mean, previously we have had a very good record of doing accounts in time with the timescales and auditors auditing in time with the required national timescales. The last year, this is the first time we've ever been in. I've been doing this for 20 years. The first time we've ever been in this position of such a delayed audit, and we're not alone in this. So it does feel something radical is going to be needed. That it is just physically not going to be possible for the current quantum of auditors to audit the current quantum of accounts that are outstanding, and we wait to see what that solution will be. So we'll share with you as soon as we know. But it would be good to get to a more regularised position. So we're back in the normal pattern of bringing you accounts in June, July, having them audited by September, and then we move into planning for the next year. And you have the comfort then of knowing the internal audit report, looking at internal audit matters, and external audit doing their work, which also includes the value for money. And you get a nicely rounded set of information, and you are missing some of that at the moment. So fingers crossed we'll get a solution that works for everybody.
I'm assuming that if you're planning to bring the plan to October, we're working on the assumption that it's all going to go well, and it's just a black swan event, isn't it, really, that could change the position and delay things. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes, I think we have to keep going with the best information we have. So we are focus on 21-22 as soon as we have any intelligence about 22-23, and whether it's the audit happens, whether it happens in a reduced scale, whether it happens to its full extent, we'll bring that back. And if timescales become tight, we'll look at advising outside of the cycle of meetings.
Councillor Hinchcliffe.
I know we're very cultural, so Black Swan may be a ballet reference, but I don't know what a Black Swan event is. So if someone can let me know what that is.
It's an unforeseen risk that manifests. Is that an accurate description, Bron?
I think it's a kind of an event of magnitude that nobody saw coming. So it wasn't on anybody's risk horizons or risk registers, and it just hits, and it's instantly an issue as opposed to a risk. But it's those ones that people just did. It was not on a radar at all or on the horizon, which happens. It does occur.
I think it's worth saying in this instance here, when there's been triennial reviews of pension figures, they haven't necessarily resulted in the significant changes that we've had this time. So you're seeing a lot of our authorities are now going from a huge liability position to positive position. So that just shows you how significant those changes in that pension data have been. And in this instance, it would be wrong for the firm to give an opinion for 21-22, knowing that we hadn't fully explored the magnitude of that change for the 21-22 effectively. So it is quite a unique event that held us back this year.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? No, thank you. So if we can move on to agenda item 10, that's a standard agenda item to consider any changes to the arrangements for internal control since the last meeting. I think, Caroline, you're going to talk us through this one, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Should start by saying this is my first time at Governance and Audit Committee, despite having been with the CA for 7 years.
How's that possible?
I know. So, but the reason why I'm here now, why you're going to keep seeing me here, is that we've done, as part of the organisational evolution work, we have pulled together the issues relating to internal governance into governance more broadly, and brought risk and compliance within that agenda. So they, as from last Monday, they now sit in within my service area and my area of scope. So I'm here presenting these reports, but this is clearly the transition point at this. So these papers may change as we go forward. And James is here on my right, because James and his team are still supporting me in in some of these functions. So if there's any detailed questions, I'm sure James can answer those. But so that's why I'm sitting here around the table. So I think these reports are probably sort of transitional in terms of where we want to move to, and where, as part of the organisational evolution work, we're sort of saying, actually, we need to give greater profile, greater priority to it. So it links in very neatly with, I think, the scope and the work of Governance and Audit Committee. So hopefully, going forward, we can start to present better information to you, the sort of information that you need, but that is dependent on systems, resources and the rest of it. So I don't want to promise the earth and fail within the first 3 months, but with that said, turning to this paper, this seeks to provide some assurances around our existing internal controls, to confirm that there have been no significant changes to those since the last time we reported to Governance and Audit, and to confirm that the work of the Officer Board, Regulatory and Compliance Board, continues to carry out those assurances, to look across that compliance information, and if needed, to then raise that, escalate that either to our Director Board, or to this committee as appropriate. So, and there's nothing that's come forward in this report to do that. I think the report also highlights that the implementation plan for our integrated HR and payroll system, which will be such a game changer, is still underway. That will make such a difference in terms of the sort of information and the confidence in the information that provides, and consistency in that. So I think once that goes live, and I think we are getting closer and closer to that, that will help in terms of that management information, in both our roles as senior managers, in terms of the advice that we provide both to committees and our officer boards. So that's I suppose that's where we are. Confirmation, no RIDOR incidents since the last meeting. So I touch wood for that, but that is a very reassuring position again. But then the second part of the report is to sort of focus on the development of a dashboard, which I know this committee has, indicated. This is the sort of information that you want to come forward. And at paragraph 2.9 there, I think we've highlighted some of the areas that we need to bring that information forward on. So work on that is underway. Our aim, and it's in your work plan, so I'm sort of committed to it, is for the next meeting of this committee in October to bring forward a starter for 10 in terms of that dashboard. So we will look to certainly pick up the information contained at 2.9, together with some other areas where we also think this committee might be interested, to populate that where we can with the information we currently hold, and then to sense check that back with this committee in terms of, is that in a format that is sufficiently transparent and useful to you as a committee? Is there anything missing in there that you would like to see coming forward in future iterations of that? So by our October committee, I should be able to present to you something which has got some substance to it, which means that we can start to have those discussions, and you can challenge and question elements of that. So there's a financial update as well as part of this report, but I shall turn to Angela for that. But in terms of the recommendations, sort of asking this committee to consider the information in that, and if there's any other areas that you aren't contained in 2.9 at the moment that members are already cited on they would like to see, to please feed that back in as well. Thank you, Chair.
Angela, did you want to come in?
Thank you. I'll just touch very briefly. The financial update has been drafted to go to the Finance Resources Committee. The meeting date was being rescheduled for a date that worked better for members. But basically, the report there will be that the year-end position, as at the end of March, is broadly in line with what was reported in February, where there was acknowledgement there would be some additional income on BOS that would be set aside. Because of the timing of it coming in, some savings on concessions and some surplus interest, income from bank interest. And again, that'll be coming back to Finance Resources Committee to consider how that then impacts on future years going forward. And the capital position was only a little down on where it was expected to be. 227 million. Figures are going up. I think this year is 300 million plus. Significant capital programme that is now moving into delivery, as well as some of the other projects we talked about before. I think it touches back on the discussions of where the internal audit focus needs to be. There's a lot of project work. There's some big mass transit, bus reform are big projects coming through that we need to be comfortable we've got the right arrangements in place for. So it does all link back together, but provide a bit more information next time following the Finance Resource Committee paper.
Thank you. So I'm particularly looking forward to seeing the dashboard. I think that will be a really good piece of work and very useful for this committee. And it's sort of a rise out of the workshop that we had a few months ago. So it'd be nice to see that input that the committee's had coming to fruition on that. So, Councillor Scullion, did you have a query?
Thank you. I think Caroline and Angela would be disappointed if I didn't, given I've made a fuss about this. Excellent start, really good. And actually, we know in this sort of area, in terms of governance, we're using some proxy measures to try and understand, is this a reasonably functioning combined authority? Does it have some problems or outliers that should trigger some further work using audit? Are there some exceptional things that need to be looked at? And I think beginning to be a kind of percentage, as it were, for each of those things. I think for me, and I know this is really difficult, is about the question of comparability. If we're looking at performance data, indeed look at off-log in terms of the new indicators for that. If we're looking at finance data and so on, one of your first questions will be, how does it compare to last year? What are the projections for next year? And of course, this is the baseline data and evidence that will give us a basis for going forward into the future. So we can't have longitudinal comparability, but what I think we do need to think about, and I think you touched on this before in terms of exploring other combined authorities are different, but there is some degree of comparability that perhaps we should look into. Are we the same as? Are we an outlier? What kind of things are they measuring that we might be interested in? Now, we would use our SIP for family if it was finance. But just thinking ahead in terms of the development. So when you come back to us, it'd be interesting just to have some reflections on that. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a good point. And we've mentioned that before, haven't we, about having benchmarks. And I think the interesting thing to me as well is what comes to this committee as opposed to going to other committees. And I think we discussed it before, having a bit of a layered approach. Because we need to ensure that this committee has the visibility of the governance, as you've just said, is the governance working or not, and the triggers, that might require action to be taken. So, but having a comparison for that would be really interesting, I think, and useful. Councillor Hinscliffe.
So, what about local government ombudsman sort of numbers? Do they come through to here, or presumably we are subject to that, are we?
Yes, we are. Yes, I can include that.
Dashboard, is that a separate report?
We can incorporate that into this dashboard. Yes.
It's on the annual, isn't it?
Okay, any other ideas or anything from any of the other committee members? Things you'd like to see included? No, I mean, it will be work in progress, and I imagine it will be something that will evolve over time anyway. So I think it's just a question of having a starting point and seeing how it works and then adapting it as we go.
Yeah, absolutely, that's my intention. I think once you start to, you don't know what's missing really until you start to look at it and you think, well, that's actually useful. So that then triggers other information. But I will take away the comparability aspects as well. That's a really, really good point. And we do have a network of monitoring officers across the CAs in the same way finance directors speak. So it'll be interesting to see at what stage they're at and whether, you know, to what extent they're capturing this information at the moment. But where they are, I can start to draw out that comparability, because we do have those sorts of conversations between us. So that's a really helpful point. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, no other questions. Can we just note the committee's considered the paper, and we'll move on to agenda item 11, and that's an update on treasury management. And I think there's a specific ask in this paper for members to confirm if they'd find refresher training useful. So firstly, on that point, can I just ask if people would find that useful? Yeah? Yes, so if we can make a note that we'd like to arrange that, please. And then Angela, do you want to take us through the paper?
I will, thank you, but I think you started at the right point in the paper really, because what we've been trying to do is set up a pack that you can get each time that has prudential indicators in that provide you with the necessary information and reassurance. But for that to work, you need to understand what the prudential indicators are telling you. So the training goes hand in hand with the information. So we'll take that away as an action to look at whether we do it in the October meeting or whether we do a separate session. But as colleagues, at least to in effect, we met them last week after we published these papers. There were no issues to report from that meeting. Everything's under control. We are looking at if there's opportunity, interest rates change, whether we should be repaying any of our debt. But we're working through the options, whether that's a sensible thing to do at this point. But also looking at what those indicators should be to be meaningful. And I think we should do that as a job lot really. Here's the proposed information that we're going to, here's what you need to know as a committee, and some of you have done the training in the past with Leeds, but then supplement that with, so here's the information you get on a regular basis, here's what you should be looking for, here's what it's telling you, and do the two together and establish, perhaps a little bit like Caroline's dashboard, perhaps a little bit iterative. Here's the starting point, here's what our treasury experts think you should be seeing each time to be aware of, and develop it from there. So we'll look whether we do that in October or arrange a separate session for you.
Thank you, I think that'd be very useful. Any questions on this paper? No? Okay, thank you. So agenda item 12, that's to receive progress on the plan to review the organisation's corporate risk management strategy and an update on corporate risk. I think that's for Caroline. And Caroline, can I just ask you as well to just bring us up to date with why we're not seeing a risk register on this particular meeting?
Thank you. I think that's a fair question. The report, I suppose, what the report seeks to do here is to give a snapshot as to where we are as an organisation and what's been happening behind the scenes at an officer level. So, as part of our movement towards an outcome-focused directorates, there's been a huge amount of work done in terms of focusing on risk associated with the delivery of our business plans. So the organisation internally has moved to a new model of monthly internal reporting for risk against the business plans, which go up to what's called ILB, which is the Chief Executive and Directors. I think, to be honest, from my perspective, whilst resource has been put into developing that model and bringing that through, it's that finite level of resource which has then been sort of being moved across from the corporate risk register, and that hasn't been updated formally in the intervening period. Directors and their senior management team are monitoring corporate risk alongside their business planning risks. My understanding, the information I've got is that there's not been any significant change from the last corporate risk register. However, personally, I still feel there should be a risk register in front of members at this meeting. I suppose that's just the reality. The resource has shifted to bring forward some development that has then effectively taken its eye off the ball in terms of that formal reporting on the corporate risk register. We need to get that back as a priority. We will definitely, we will have a corporate risk register for this committee at its next meeting. There's a lot of work. The report itself talks about. This was, directors discussed this at their meeting on the 14th of July, so it's very current in terms of what is actively happening. It isn't that risk has not been seen as a priority internally, and the senior management team are testing that out in terms of changes to our risk management strategy at their meeting in early August. So there's development in terms of improving our internal processes and strategies for managing risk. But I still think we should have had the risk register here at this meeting. So my priority is to ensure that we do for the next meeting, and I'll have to leave it at that, I think.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Councillor Scullion.
I think that was a very handsome and elegant apology for other folk actually, but you're absolutely right. It should be with us, and I can see that there's a hiatus in terms of revising the approach and modernising and updating. And that's absolutely right. We need to be current in how we manage risk, but nonetheless, it should have been here, and I would hope that it was communicated to the senior managers in the organisation that it's really not acceptable for the Governance and Audit Committee not to have that. But having said that, I just wanted to link this paper to our previous paper on Treasury Management, actually, because part of presumably the updating work is about understanding our appetite for risk and how that changes according to the landscape around us, and the changes, as Councillor Hinchcliffe has already said, we're about to embark on a big period of change in the combined authorities world in terms of the big transport changes. So that question of security, liquidity, yield, how we manage things going forward, I think it's important that we're absolutely up to date on that in terms of understanding the exposure to risk and the management and the mitigation of risk. I'll stop there, Chair. I could go on for quite a long time about risk, but...
Thank you. I think you're right, and we have discussed before as well, even things like the impact of inflation on some of these big programmes. So we need to have all of that considered in the round, really. Councillor Hinchcliffe, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just think from a risk register point of view, is there an agreement about where it should go and when? So what regularity does it go to the audit committee? If does it go to the CA at any point? Because in Bradford we see quarterly risk registers to the executive meeting. Have we thought that through, basically?
And I think that's part of the debate. I think the risk registers regularly come here. It regularly goes to the internal officer meetings. I think there's a question whether it goes to the combined authority, or whether this committee feels it should comment on it and feed that intelligence through to the combined authority. So it might be one you want to consider in looking at the risk development arrangements of the combined authority. Agenda is very busy, and it's whether it would a view from this committee might help inform a discussion rather than the full register and the combined authority redo, in inverted commas, what you've already got done here when you see it. But definitely take that into account. I think we've taken it in the past, the combined authority, irregularly. It's not gone on a regular basis, but we should be really clear who sees it when and what their role is. We've talked about whether the committee should see, I think, and it's something you raised previously, Chair, whether the committee should see the risks relating to what they're delivering, and we don't routinely take it to the other thematic committees. So if there's a climate change risk, should that be the climate change committee? So I think it's all food for thought as we try to establish the best way forward on it.
I think that would be good. And is there a mechanism? I mean, by the time this committee sees the risk register next, it's be the best part of 6 months, won't it, since we last saw it? Is there a mechanism whereby any risk that arises could be brought to this committee outside of the regular meetings? Would we be cited on that at all?
We could, yes. I mean, answer is yes, that is possible, if that's what the committee would want to happen.
Just wondering what other committee members would think about that. Yeah, Councillor Scullion.
Chair, I would expect if there was a major change to the risk register or a new serious risk in terms of the grid, you know, scored likelihood and significance, I would expect the chair of audit to be included somewhere in that list. As Councillor Hinchcliffe says, there needs to be a clear protocol and sequencing of this.
Thank you. Councillor First, did you want to come in?
Well, I just want to agree with colleagues that have said things before. I think the ultimate view is the fact that we need to be absolutely clear that obviously in the report the figures that are provided are even out of date, whether not making a political point, but the fact when it comes to inflation and other things like that, we may see inflation rise, and as a result, if we haven't been able to analyse those results for over 6 months, then we need to find that other mechanism to do that and potentially take it further up the chain, given the nature of the situation and given that, unfortunately, what a time that we can't have that report given the current financial climate that we're in. But appreciate colleagues have already said those points.
Thank you. Did you want to come back on that, or? Thank you.
I think value the comments that have been made around the table, and what I take away from that is if there's anything significant or serious that's arisen since the last time the committee has seen that risk register, then we will draw that to your attention, Chair, and the need for that clear written protocol in terms of roles and responsibilities, those escalations. And again, that's something that this committee would want to see and have the confidence that that's in place. So they are the two. Getting the
Thank you. Agenda item 13, which is on the revised code of corporate governance. And Caroline, I think this is you again, please.
It is, thank you, Chair. This is quite a light touch report. I think it's flagging. It has appended to it a copy of the revised code itself. The report sets out at paragraph 2.5 the changes that have been made to that and why they've been made. I think it also recognises that things are moving so quickly internally that further revisions do address in particular the delivery of mass transit, bus reform, and potentially deeper devolution deals. So it's a point in time revision that is in front of members at the moment. That does need further revision, and again we are aiming to do that and have that back to this committee for its October meeting. So I'm very happy to take any questions, but that is the purpose of bringing it at this point.
Thank you. Any questions? No, I've sort of got one comment, I suppose, which links back to the earlier agenda item on the dashboard. This is a really key document in terms of the governance, isn't it? And some of my question really is, how do we know that what's written in here is actually working? And some of it will be implicit because we will receive at this committee reports on some of this, but other areas aren't. Like you say we will manage data. How do we know that that's actually going to work? So are there any measures around this that we could put in and include in the dashboard so that we know that the model itself is working?
That's a really good comment, really good challenge back. I think absolutely yes. I think one of the ways to try and avoid separate processes running is to, when we bring the dashboard, is to have that cross-referencing, I think, between what we're saying in the corporate code and the dashboard itself. So one references back to the other. And as part of pulling together the dashboard, what we will do is take this code and the actions in it and identify where we can have very clear measurable performance indicators or targets. Are they in the dashboard? If it has to be a bit more of an iterative way of measuring against it, how do we do that? And actually bring that back as a cross-reference piece of work to give this committee the assurance that that's happening, and also so that we know, the committee can know where to look, or we look to provide that information in a slightly different way. So, yeah, fair challenge. Whether I can complete that by October, I will endeavour to, but if it's still work in progress at that point, I'll bring forward what we have done and identify what still is to be done, if that's acceptable.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, any other questions? No? Thank you. I think that brings us to the end of the meeting. So thank you all very much.